Why would someone be critical of a solid work ethic? And could the relentless pursuit of your goals lead to misery? I'm Nikos Sotirakopoulos, and this is New Idea Live, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. With me, literally with me today in Athens, is Tristan de Liège, and from oceans away, Elan Journo. Hi all, and today the topic is hustle culture. So first of all, what is hustle culture and why has it recently been problematized? Why do people say that if you hustle, it's something which is destructive for your life? So let's start with understanding our terms. So what is, quote, hustle culture? So hustle culture is this glorification of work, first of all. It's placing work at the center of your values, at the center of what you try to achieve in life. But also, it's a mindset that pushes you to do more. It's this voice that is telling you that you could be something more, that you could do better in life, and that you should go all in pursuit of this, let's say, higher vision of yourself. Now, when it comes to examples in the culture out there of people who, let's say, promote hustle culture or who personify hustle culture, figures you might have seen are, for example, Gary Vaynerchuk. He's an entrepreneur and he keeps encouraging people to pursue their dreams, pursue a side hustle career, do their own thing, work harder so that they make their hobby, for example, into a profession. Or what about someone like Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL, who is now a leadership teacher, and every morning he posts on Instagram the photo of his watch waking up at 4:30 in the morning. Or someone like David Goggins, who used to be very miserable in life. He was sad, he was obese, he was praying for cockroaches. Nothing wrong with that, but he was very unhappy. And then he became someone he would never imagine of becoming, a Navy SEAL, an ultra marathon runner. And again, he's someone who says that you can always do more if you work hard and if you suffer. So this term suffering, I know it's something that you are quite interested in. Now, what about the critics of hustle culture? The critics of hustle culture claim that it actually makes you very focused on only one thing in life, only in your work. And this is alienating. This means you will probably have no personal life. This will lead to burnout, and this will make you antisocial. So they say hustle culture is not only something that is going to bring forward a better life, but it's someone which is going to sabotage your life and sabotage your goals. So Tristan, let's start from this point of view. So why would someone who is interested in philosophy care about what some people say about work or whether we should work hard? What's the interest in the student of philosophy in all that?
So in the history of philosophy, it's actually, interestingly, not a common centerpiece of views of ethics to think about productive work and what its role is. But from objectivism's perspective, part of what makes objectivism radical and from objectivism's perspective is really important is productive work and its meaning as the central way in which we express and use our rational capacity. So from just to quote Rand here on productiveness, so she views productiveness as it's your acceptance of morality, your recognition of the fact that you choose to live. Productive work is the process by which man's consciousness controls his existence, a constant process of acquiring knowledge and shaping matter to fit one purpose, of translating an idea into physical form, of remaking the earth in the image of one's values. So she sees it as it's not just a peripheral value. It's not just something that is required to do for your survival. It's not something that you just have to fit into your life as one value among others. It's actually central in terms of the kind of person you become through your work, and then what you achieve through your work, the way that you shape the earth in the image of your values, the way that you use the material to fit your purpose and to create wealth is of profound spiritual importance for Rand, because It's an expression of our capacity for rationality, and it's how we can enjoy that capacity for rationality in terms of experiencing life as purposeful, having a sense of our own competence and self-esteem, and being able to relate to other people as traders and collaborators.
So, Elan, there seems to be a dichotomy here. What Tristan just described is hard work and aspiring to be productive as almost a spiritual experience, let's say a moral calling. Whereas in the culture out there and in the critics of this phenomenon of quote hustling, people say, oh, if you hustle, you're going to be shallow, you're going to be superficial, you're going to be, to put it in the words of a philosopher of the new left, Marcuse, you're going to be one-dimensional. So where is the truth there? Why is this dichotomy in how people view hustling out there?
I think just to build on what Tristan was saying in answer to your question, I think Ayn Rand is very interested in the role of work in life. And so to draw out a thread from what Tristan was saying, in her philosophy, one of the virtues, one of the means to succeeding in your life, to self-preservation, is the idea of the principle of productiveness. Not productivity, productiveness. It's the idea of creating values, of supporting yourself by that. And to your point, Nikos, her view of productiveness, now, if you think about her concern with this, a big part of what she focuses on in the stories she writes is the work and the career of certain characters. I mean, that's the big arc in Atlas Shrugged. And so she has a lot of deep observations about what it looks like to do this well and what it looks like not to take it seriously. And one of the themes that comes out, particularly in Atlas Shrugged, you can see this, it's true as well in The Fountainhead for those who've read it, that in her view, productiveness is not just, yeah, you created some value, you have food to eat on the table, you've got a hunk of meat and you've got shelter. It's not, that isn't nearly the full conception of what productiveness is. That's just the bare minimum of what you need to survive. But it's a deeply spiritual, has deeply spiritual significance. And spiritual here doesn't mean in sort of religious terms. It just means with respect to your mind and your personality and your mind and your character, I should say. So to take on head on the issue you're raising, Nikos, why do people think then that you're going to be shallow? Well, her view of the role of work is really radically different from most people's in the culture. And Tristan, you can tell us more about how this relates to the history of philosophy, but I'm pretty sure from my understanding, it is a very radical view in the history of philosophy. I mean, even among better thinkers among the Greeks, they had a view of work that was different, and their view of the use of the mind in creating values was radically different. So there's a couple of things to say about why people think of work as shallow, and it goes to some of the criticisms that you've raised. One of them is just this idea of there's a division in the world between your mind or your character and action, right? Mind and body, thought and action, theory and practice. And there's a lot of dimensions to that, and that's not really our topic, but just to know that that's present. And it's reinforced from all sorts of directions, both from religion and from sort of secular perspectives, that you can either be an artist or you can be an engineer. You can't be both. You're either someone who thinks or you're a doer. And in Ayn Rand's conception, that is completely wrong. There's no necessary dichotomy here, no necessary alternative. You don't have to choose between those two. And in fact, she thinks that all work, if it's really productive work, it fundamentally requires you to use your mind to achieve values. And so in that sense, it's the union of the two, not the separation of them. That's sort of just the beginning of an answer to that issue. But I wanted to throw a couple of things back at you guys just to see, because Nikos, you're the one who was really keen on this topic. And I want to hear a bit more from you. What do you see as, so I suggested we put this in scare quotes, hustle culture, because it's a really interesting thing. What is it trying to capture? What is it trying to isolate from all the things in the world? So I'd like to hear, so what do you think of it? What are the best elements of it? And then let's talk about, maybe we can get into some of the criticisms and what's going on there.
Yeah, so I'm quite enthusiastic about hustle culture, to be honest, and I want to defend it from these attacks, which I see as straw-manning attacks. So, but why am I so enthusiastic? So we live in a culture that celebrates thank God it's Friday. We live in a culture that says love your flaws and accept yourself as you are. We live in a culture that is quite skeptical of the idea that you have agency. What does it mean that I have agency? It means I can put my mind into work to achieve goals. I can understand the world, and therefore I can change it through my work or through my actions. So we live in a culture that these things like, oh, I have control on my mind, I can make sense of the world, I can change. All these elements are put into question mark, to put it very mildly, or from many other people, they are completely denied. No, you don't have a control, you don't have agency, you're determined from your environment, you're very vulnerable. Yeah. And here you have some people who say, no, you do have control. You can take life in your own hands. You can exercise agency. And also, you can be better than what you are. So how, for example, you mentioned Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand sees art as, in a way, life as it could be, which means life can be something better. We have to aspire to the heroic. We have to aspire to the higher in terms of, not higher again in a religious way, but I can be better than this. I can have a vision for myself, something that I really want to be, that I have chosen, and I want to reach that vision. So I would say hustle culture is almost countercultural these days. It goes against most of the trends in society out there. And not only today, I grew up with the legend of Icarus. He tried to fly close to the sun and he collapsed. And I think I was always very depressed from this story. Why didn't he manage to get to the sun? Why did he have to collapse? So this ambitiousness, this moral ambitiousness, but also practical ambitiousness. You can start your own business, whatever. So this moral and the practical thing, they come together in hustle culture. It says that you can do more and you can find meaning through this work. So I find this, again, countercultural, almost I would say radical and revolutionary in today's culture of low expectations. Do you share my enthusiasm?
Do you see value in it? I'm curious your perspective.
So what's interesting about hustle culture is that it's sometimes here to know what's being packaged in it, and because criticizing it often have, you could say, an anti-capitalist bent, or a view that, okay, work shouldn't be that important in life. That is going to color the way that they criticize hustle culture, I think.
Or you work for someone else. You work hard, but someone else gets the benefit.
Right. So there are a lot of issues like that complicate evaluating it in terms of thinking, okay, what are the people that are defending hustle culture? People that you mentioned, like Goggins, or Elon Musk is typically cited as a representative. What are they actually defending? What are they actually committed to? But what I see often is confusions on at least two issues. One is the idea that working hard is really important. And what's a confusion in that? Well, in one sense, you could take that to mean it's really important to be ambitious. It's really important to grow. It's really important to constantly be learning, constantly be challenging yourself, not being complacent. On the other hand, you can take that to mean you need to suffer. You need to make sacrifices, in the sense of genuine sacrifices. Like, you need to give up things that you actually want as values in your life in order to achieve it, or in order to be successful. Whether it's, you need to sacrifice friendships, or you need to sacrifice leisure time, or you need to sacrifice rest, whatever it is. And that if you're not suffering, you're not trying hard enough, you're lazy, or you're not being ambitious enough. So that's one issue that I find potentially problematic. And the other issue is that I think it's possible to take the idea of hustling, or the goal of hustling, as an ideal in a second-handed way, in the sense that, and what I mean by second-handed is you're taking on or adopting standards that other people have set for you or that society has set for you. For example, if your motivation for doing a certain kind of work or pursuing a certain kind of career is, oh, other people will view me as a loser if I don't make enough money, or my friends and family will be disappointed, or partner won't respect me, or I'm not going to be popular, or I'm not going to be able to. I'm not going to have the kind of prestige or status that I want in my life. If it's defined in terms like that, in terms of standards that other people are setting, expectations that other people are setting, or duties that other people expect of you, perhaps, I think that's a second-handed approach to work that can sometimes happen in what I see in people talking about hustle culture, people talking about hustling, where it's not clear is what are the standards something that you're personally setting? Is this what personally matters to you the most? And from objectivism's perspective, productive work is not a value because society or some third personal standard has determined that you're a loser if you don't work 80 hours a week, or if you don't make X amount of money, or whatever it is. There's no such perspective in objectivism. From objectivism's perspective, which I think is the right perspective on this issue, all values have to be first-handed. You have to choose them. You have to conceive of them yourself. You have to understand how they fit together. Yeah. And it can't be that you take on other people's standards. And the reason I think my reaction to hustle culture is more mixed is I think some of the critics are picking up on that there's a problem with uncritically accepting other people's standards, and it can result in a loss of motivation and a feeling of burnout or exhaustion because you don't know why you're doing it anymore. You're not setting limits on what you're doing, and it can undercut your ability to approach it rationally and to stay engaged and motivated in your work.
So let me emphasize something on what you said, and then let me play devil's advocate and throw a question to Elan. So you mentioned that if you have to work hard, you have to have chosen why you are doing it. I'm doing it because I want to reach a particular aim. So I have some personal experience of the opposite, which is what you said, hustling without out of context, as we would say. So around 2016, when I was working a not very fulfilling university job, I read a book called The Miracle Morning by a guy called Hal Elrod, who actually talked about the benefits of waking up very early. So I liked the idea, so I said, good, I'm going to wake every day at 5 o'clock and I'm going to start working at 5 o'clock. So I did this. And then I was like, what am I working about? My work, it's unfulfilling, so it doesn't require a lot of work. So why do I wake up at 5? And like, what's the point of this? And of course, within a week, I stopped doing it because there was no point. I like the idea, but I adopted someone else's standard. That guy had a fulfilling career, so it made sense for him to wake up early. But at that point of my life, suffering for the sake of it, quote, suffering for the sake of it, didn't make much sense. So definitely, I agree that hustling makes sense within a goal that is meaningful to you. So now, for example, that I enjoy my work, it would make sense to wake up a bit earlier, to put more work and to be more productive. But Elan, here both of you seem to be questioning the virtue, let's say, of suffering, to be questioning the virtue of feeling the pain towards the pursuit of your goals. But wouldn't someone say that Randian heroes in the novel actually do suffer, in or out of quotation marks, the suffering? So here's a line from The Fountainhead. So our hero, Howard Rourke, is an architect who definitely works hard, and a friend of his who is worried because Rourke is working so hard makes this remark, says, Howard, quote, "You're completely natural only when you're 1 inch from bursting into pieces. What in hell are you really made of, Howard? After all, it's only a building. It's not the combination of holy sacrament, Indian torture, and sexual ecstasy that you seem to make of it." And Rourke replies, isn't it? So Elan, is it Indian torture indeed? And if Rourke agrees that, yeah, sometimes it looks like Indian torture, the process of being productive and creative, then why not embrace that suffering is part of the game?
I don't think it's the right way to think of it. What's powerful to me in that quotation that you read from the Fountainhead is, let's step away from the terminology of hustle culture for a moment, because I'm not super comfortable with that framing of things. But I think what's right in this discussion, that it's sort of buried here, is this idea of being ambitious for values. And I think what's distinctive in Ayn Rand's philosophy is that that's a good thing, that creating values first-handedly, choosing them and pursuing them doggedly, that is what life is about. And to be ambitious about that is to be ambitious about your life, is to take your life seriously and say, I want to make every minute count. This is all I have. And I'm going to, and that's important. And you see that in Rourke, you see that in all the heroes of her books. Because I think her perspective is, this is it. This is the value that you have, and you think about how to maximize it. Let me tease out one aspect of this, because I think part of what you're motivated by here in this, asking this question, is, well, isn't he suffering? He's admitting it, and it's sort of like Indian torture, and isn't that terrible? I think it's useful to distinguish between something that's effortful or challenging or uncomfortable and suffering or pain even. So I had various projects that I would say were really hard. They were physically grueling to get the work done, but I liked it, because what I was focused on is, this is what I want to accomplish. This is the thing I want to create. This is the thing I want to have people see and consume or learn from. And I think part of the mindset that comes from thinking about values in the way Ayn Rand recommends is, she likes this expression that comes up in one of her essays, causality versus duty. And she's borrowed this from someone else. And the idea is, you take what you want and you pay for it. I hope I've got that, paraphrase that exactly right. But the idea is that if there are things you want out of life, no one's going to hand them to you. And it's wrong to expect that. And it's wrong to expect them to come to you effortlessly, because anything worth having is worth investing in. And the idea is that if this is what you want, however high you've set your sights, life is about going after that. And so to me, does that require, you might lose some sleep. You might have to prioritize your goals in a certain way that it doesn't look like the conventional nuclear family experience. It's not Leave It to Beaver. It's something very different. And it doesn't matter, because there is no script. And to your point from earlier, Tristan, about adopting standards from other people, there might be good things about certain modes of living that you choose to adopt. Like, I want to have this kind of role for my hobbies, and this is what I want to do with my family, my distant, but it doesn't look the same for everyone, and it shouldn't, because if you are really defining your values individually, I've thought about, this is what I want to accomplish in my life, this is the career path I'm trying to pursue and move forward on. It's not going to look the same, and if it does, then you have to really think, why am I, what have I adopted here? So to me, it's, effort is part of achieving values. It's something to be embraced, not chafed at. And one thing, if you peel a layer back here, there's two sort of philosophic issues that are worth naming, and we can decide to talk about them more or less. One is, there's an actual issue that everyone faces here. It's not just within the context of the debate of a hustle culture. There's a real question of, how do you structure your life? How do you rank your goals? What hierarchy of values are you pursuing? And that's a distinctively objectivist perspective. You have values in your life. What are their relative importance to you? And that's not going to be constant throughout your life. You're going to have to reprioritize certain things based on where you are and what you're doing. But figuring that out is not a set it and forget it issue. It's something you need to be thinking about and being purposeful and adapting to the situation. So there's a real issue here. And I think that's in the background that's worth addressing. The second one is, and this goes more to the critics and the idea, some of the ideas behind the criticisms. Throughout discussions about work, in this context of the hustle culture. We read some interesting articles in preparation for today, and it's just all over the place, and it's sort of like it's hitting you over the head that so much of the way people think about work is colored by what you could call this Garden of Eden perspective. It's like, well, the default should be we just walk around, we get what we want, it's a paradise, and then the fact that we have to do work is a burden and a punishment. And then so, well, of course I'm going to resent it. And then they come up with all sorts of stories about how you're working for the man, you're being exploited, you're this whole sort of theoretical structure that comes along with that. But that's completely false. That's an unhealthy perspective on values. That's not true of how values are accomplished. And the reverse is true, is that recognizing that values require you to put action into it is the step towards sort of developing a healthy perspective on your work and the values you want to accomplish. So let me hand it back to you. I'm curious, Tristan or to Nikos, on that issue of suffering, and then how to think about it in the cultural context.
So suffering. So wait a minute. So here, it looks like the only disagreement we have at the end of the day is what is the definition of suffering. So Tristan and Elan, probably you mean feeling discomfort, feeling giving up some things that are lower, however, in your hierarchy of value. For example, you don't go and play bowling, for example, but you do something which is more important to you. So we could say existentially, so to speak, this is not suffering. So it's probably what Rand says, it's pain that only goes so far. It's discomfort, or you give up something, but even if it's difficult, you still know that you can achieve. So the example that comes to mind, again from fiction, is Howard Rourke when initially his career as an architecture looks like it has failed, and he goes in the quarry, and there he does work that every muscle aches at the end of the day. But he knows that I'm still on a path. I still want my life to go in a particular way, and this is a hurdle. I don't know if ever I'm going to be a great architect, but I'll still be on the path. And this path is I'm going to do good work. I'm going to lead my life based on my values. So here's a question here. Does it make sense to quote hustle, to work hard, to put your work or productiveness at the center of your life, when you are not doing the work of your dreams? So should we quote hustle where we are in the quarry? Because a criticism of hustle culture says that people work hard in jobs that are not meaningful. And indeed, many people, they find their jobs not meaningful. So does the virtue of productiveness, does the virtue of hard work still apply when you're, let's say, in the quarry, rather than when you're building the Ayn Rand house, to bring it back to the fountainhead?
Yeah, so I think what you just asked brings out something really important, which is that working hard isn't an end in itself. You can actually work hard at things that aren't ambitious. I've known people, for example, who have a sort of work hard, play hard mentality, where they work really hard at a day job, or maybe an evening job like bartending or something like that. And then they spend the rest of their time spending that money on, frivolous activities, or like getting drunk, or, just doing drugs or whatever, and kind of escaping the pain and boredom that they feel.
So in a not partying, because someone will say is partying wrong, but partying in an unfulfilling way, that you wake up the next day and say, my life is not better than it was yesterday.
Right. And you can have a perspective of, well, that person's still, working really hard. They're still working a lot of hours, but that's not what's really important. And that's not a measure of, how well they're living, if what we just mean is, well, they're really exhausted, or they work really long hours. And that's part of what I was trying to bring out with the idea of, there's something packaged into the idea of working hard that I think is problematic. And then because it's a problematic package, I think you get the issue that it's not really helpful as guidance. if you wanted to phrase like a short phrase like that, that would be more helpful. It'd be something more like work intelligently.
Okay.
You know, like work in such a way that you understand the value of what you're doing. You understand how it fits into all of your goals. You understand why that's the most important thing to do right now. One of my favorite writers about work is an author named Greg McKeown, and he has a sort of a productivity mindset he calls essentialism. And part of that framework is when you're working, you ask yourself, it's the most important thing I could be doing right now with my time, like for the life I want to live. And I think that's a much more helpful perspective than like, could I be working harder? Could I, do I still have like more energy that I could use up? That it's not going to Elan's point. There might be cases in which, you have to push yourself a bit past your normal limits and you might be exhausted, but that's not the norm, or that shouldn't be the norm, and it's certainly not a standard of whether you're succeeding or not.
Well, to be honest, I have my best night's sleep when I feel exhausted. So I see some fulfillment in that. But Elan has a comment. I want to get back later to the question of what do you do when your work is a bit unfulfilling? Should you still give your best?
I want to come back to that, but I just want to respond. One thing here is there's in the debate, we should talk more about some of the criticisms as well of what this phenomenon is. But part of what comes out is it's as if there are preset ways of working, and you're being pushed into the wrong one. And the hustle culture is tricking you into this model of work that's wrong. And I would challenge that, not that you shouldn't be ambitious. I challenge that there are preset ways of what your work life should be. It's something you need to define. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're starting a company and you're putting in 18, 20 hours a day because this is your dream, without this, you don't want to exist. This is the thing that gives you the goal that is driving you, the value that you're trying to create. There's no position from which someone can look at you and say you're doing the wrong thing. Yeah, and you might, because if you've chosen it and you're clear about their goal and it's objective to you and you can justify it yourself, this is a rational goal. I think it has a chance of succeeding. And yeah, I'm just not going to date for this year. I just don't have the bandwidth to date. What I really want to do is master this thing. I want to figure it out. There's no position it's not clear to me how someone could be in a position to tell you that's the wrong thing. And the same thing is true for people who say, well, look, the kind of structure I want for my work is that I get home for dinner to see my kids and I have time to help them with their homework. And that's part of the constellation of values that I want to have in my life. And again, there's no position from which someone can tell you, well, you're doing it wrong. The question is there an objective basis for your goal? Have you identified your values in such a way, and are you still, with respect to the role of work and career in your life, is it still the source of the organizing principle around which you've ranked certain things more highly than other people? And so in that respect, when you think about some of these sort of life hacks, like wake up at 5 a.m. or I think some of them can be useful, but they're not principles. They're sort of rules of thumb, or the little tricks here and there, and they're going to work for some people in certain contexts. They're not going to work for other people. And that's because partly people differ in how they want to work, but more fundamentally, how you structure your time is going to be it's unique to your context and your goals. And if I want to work 20 hours a day, that's my life. That's what I'm going to do. And I don't see the basis for a criticism of that. So let me flip it over and say, to your question, Nikos, what if you're in a job that you don't find fulfilling, and should you be, quote, hustling in that context? And so one is, let's question the premise there. Why are you in a job that's not fulfilling? What would it look like to hold this job in a fulfilling way? And should you be looking at other things? Like, should you be doing this, but also looking for something better? Are you taking your life seriously? And I've had many jobs prior to the Institute that I would say were not fulfilling. And there's things you can do to make them more fulfilling. And to put it more broadly, whatever job you're doing, if it's a legitimate job, it's actually creating value in some context, in some workplace that you should be doing, and leaving aside crime and that sort of thing, there is no job that cannot be done better and more efficiently. And you might not be the person to make the decision about whether it should be changed. Like there's certain things in a medical context that you're not the one to make that call, or, but you can raise it and say, well, look, I think we can do better here. Or I want to try something different, and challenge yourself. Well, this took me, I'll give you an example. So there was a case where I had to do some accounting work in one role I had. It's got very boring once every 3 months. And you had to fill out this tax form, and it was 16 sources of data. And I thought, this is really boring. What would make it more interesting? Well, how could I grow as a result of doing this job? And one answer to that is you can't, it's impossible. The other answer is, well, what if you set a timer? So it took me 20 minutes to do it normally. What if I did an 18? What would that look like? I would have to be super focused. And then I came up with the idea, well, suppose you created a spreadsheet that does all calculations for you, and it takes me 1 minute. And then I learned how to do spreadsheets in a way that's more complicated. And so I've grown as a result of that. And then I can see my way out of doing that job. But I think in many cases, when I've encountered this with people, the idea I'm doing a job I don't like, I'm not going to put all the effort into it, is how do you think you're going to get to a job you do like? What would that look like? It doesn't always mean you do it through that particular job and climb, but it might mean you put in the effort to find a better job and treat the whole enterprise as something important and worth investing in.
But here's my biggest problem with the critics of quote hustle culture, that there's this cynicism that basically says, don't bother. You cannot find a very fulfilling job, is a lie, and the only person who benefits is your boss. So what you said here, Elan, is that no, there is an aspiration even when I do a boring job, because A, I can do it better, B, there's something there for me. I can find fulfillment, or I can learn a skill that I can later use. So there's an ambitiousness there. This ambitiousness is what is completely lacking from the critics. They're not telling you, if your job is boring, work hard to find a better job. For example, it's what Gary Vee says. You hate your job, okay, do a side hustle. Start a side hustle, but it's not easy. So you have to stay up late. And sorry, this is the truth. You cannot start a successful side hustle 3 hours every day, most of the times. So it's this cynicism that for me is the biggest problem with the criticism of hustle culture. And you notice that these people are also cynical when it comes to trade, when it comes to capitalism, and when it comes even to the idea of the so-called American dream. They say that we are sold a lie. They say that hustle culture is a scam. Why? Because it promises you that if you work hard, then you're going to achieve. And my question to them is this: if working hard is a scam, then what would be your advice to someone? And usually their advice has to do with organizing a union, ask for universal basic income. Yeah. And my problem here is not even politics, okay? My problem is, what does this do to your self-esteem? It tells you that the solution will come from someone else. And of course, coming together with people, forming a union within particular context, and if your action is not violent, well, this could make sense. But my problem is their mindset. The mindset is, what can you do? It's like this shrug. Well, you can't do anything. This cynicism. And this is bad, again, for the person who adopts this mindset. So you're not hurting your boss. If you adopt this mindset, you're mostly hurting yourself, I would say. Go on. I'm just keeping an eye on the comments, okay. And I want to thank the people who contribute. Someone says, didn't Ayn Rand also do boring admin job in an architect's office so she could write fountainhead? But here's the thing, there was a purpose there. The purpose was very high. I want to write the fountainhead. Therefore, I'm going to do, quote, something which might be a chore. And this is the case so you want to write an article, editing is boring, or for some people. But this doesn't mean that it's within a context that it makes sense. So thanks again to us and to our super chatters. So you were saying something, Tristan.
Well, so there's a lot to unpack here, but I think just in terms of tying together a couple of the threads we've been talking about here, and I think this will also tie into some of the attacks on hustle culture, is that the rational perspective on how you're thinking about work and how it relates to meaning and how it relates to fulfillment and achievement is always a causal perspective. So you never, from a rational perspective, you don't regard, going to Elan, to your point, you don't regard, the effect of, I want my work to be meaningful, and you think about it or you wish it, and you don't try to think about, how do I bring that about? There's always a perspective of, okay, that's the effect I want, that's the goal that I want. How do I enact the cause, or what are the causes potential causes that I can explore? But it goes to the other way too, and that's, so to kind of push back on what you were saying before, Elan, I think I agree with you insofar as, if what we're saying is, so before you were saying what's a perspective from which you can criticize the way someone's approaching their work given that they've chosen it. Well, I think there are causal perspectives from which you can criticize it insofar as the mere fact that, so there's one issue of, have you first-handedly chosen those standards, but those standards also have to be based on reality. And we have physical and mental limitations. We have emotional needs, and people have different needs. So people need to think about, what are my needs? Maybe you don't need a relationship, or maybe you don't need as much rest as another person. But I think there are cases in which people aren't thinking about that rationally, and they just think in terms of, I can just do whatever I choose, and I don't have to think about the mental and physical costs involved with that.
Can we give an example to our audience so that to concretize it?
Yeah, so you might think, I've seen many cases where people don't put enough effort into friendships, and they don't realize that actually they really want and need the intimacy from a friendship, but they think, I can just set that aside. I can get everything I need from my partner, and I just choose to live that way. And then they experience a sense of loneliness and a sense of disconnectedness from people. And the perspective from which to criticize it is not, I want you to live the way I've decided is the right kind of life. It's not a kind of intrinsicism, but there is a perspective from which you can say, look, you need to think more carefully about what your needs are and how everything fits together in your life as a whole. Don't just think about right now, or don't just think about in a narrow sense, just a narrow set of values that you're pursuing right now. Think about, what are all the values available to you? What do they look like pursued into the future? And do they fit together with what you actually sustain them and engage them? Just one more point on that is, I think, to the critics now, I think part of the problem, so you have people like Sarah Jaffe who have that perspective, right? That, the idea of work being fulfilling is a myth that's being forced on us. And we don't have to get into the political elements of it. But I think part of the problem is that's a non-causal perspective. The causal perspective is, there's no such thing as automatic fulfillment. There's not a material Garden of Eden, and there's not a spiritual Garden of Eden. There's no such thing as, if you're in a natural state, you're automatically fulfilled. Fulfillment takes work. It takes thinking, and you have to earn fulfillment, and you have to earn meaning through exercising your mind, through engaging your capacity to produce and create values. And that has to be done in a productive way, because that's the only way that humans can fundamentally experience competence. There are other ways that we can obviously engage our minds, but if we're not engaging it productively, by the nature of human life, someone has to be doing it for us. And that's something that's central to Rand's point as well, is that part of what it means that productiveness is central to human nature is that it's what sustains human life. And if you're not doing it, if you're not engaged in that, someone else is doing that for you. And, you know, to go to the point of, well, what if you just didn't work, or, you know, you had universal basic income? Well, you're missing out on a crucial experience of you're competent to sustain and create your own life.
So
And that has to be created.
it makes sense. But I want to throw a last question to both of you, which is perhaps one of the most, I don't know, there are many controversial things that Ayn Rand said, but this is one of the most controversial for many people, and which is that productiveness is the most important, let's say, or actually, let me put it in the way she puts it, that productiveness is a recognition of the fact that your work is the purpose of your life. And many people get this, wait, isn't that even of my happiness the purpose of my life? Or there are quotes by some Randian, by some heroes in her novels that may confuse people. So, for example, Francisco says in Atlas Shrugged something like, there's nothing of any importance in life except how well you do your work. So someone could take this in a particular context and say, wait a minute, so what about things like love? Well, I remember, I think there are people who are objectivists who claim, no, for me the most important thing is not my career, is my romantic life, for example. So what does this mean when it says that that productiveness is a recognition that your work is the purpose of your life? And where do values like romantic love, for example, or happiness in terms of having a family, how do they fit within this understanding of productiveness as, again, and the work as being the center of your life? So if someone hasn't got their work at the center of their life, are they immoral, Elan?
No, I wouldn't say that they're immoral. I think it would be a question of what is organizing their values. And I think what serves that function well, because it's the focal point of where you create values in your life, is career or work. So I wouldn't go to the step. You need to know a lot more about someone to say that they're immoral than that, because there could be reasons they can't work. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they incapacitated in some way. I mean, if you're broadening it to Ayn Rand's conception of the good life, which sounds like sort of thrust of your question, I think her view is that romantic love is a high value. It belongs in your life. It's an irreplaceable value if you can find it. And part of what is needed is to have a conception of what your life is going to be. So we've been talking around it a number of different angles here, but we can put it in different terms here, that part of the responsibility of living is to identify your own picture of what your life is going to be. And that includes, fundamentally, what kind of values you're going to create. What are you going to do with yourself? What is your career? What is your path in life? How are you going to create the values? And in doing that, there's so much more we could talk about here, but in doing that, the spiritual side of work is that you're, in the course of working on something that's really meaningful to you, you're creating yourself. You're building, you're reinforcing certain traits of character. You're reinforcing, you need to use the virtues in order to accomplish certain things. So it's sort of a self-reinforcing process. So work isn't just about, well, you need food on the table. There's deep psychological and spiritual aspects to how work is valuable to you and where to place it. And there are lots of options. You said, what about family? Yeah, I have a family. It's very important to me. They're irreplaceable to me. That's not true for everybody. No, it doesn't mean that everyone needs to go and get married or have a partner and build a family. That's not true for everyone. Does it fit your picture of your life? And the answer could be yes. The answer could be no, or it could be in 10 years' time. I just want to stress one really important point here, which we've kind of touched on in different ways. And I've put it in a kind of metaphorical term. There's no script for you that's written out there that you have to figure out and then follow. Other people are going to hand it to you. that is the actual issue of taking your life seriously and figuring out what that looks like. And you can have inspirations, people can help you, you can figure out from looking at other people and learning from that. But there is no inherent model that we're all supposed to be following. And that's the point. I agree with your criticism, Tristan, but that no one is in a position to criticize you about your choices. I agree with what you're pushing back on, but the point I'm trying to capture is there's no sort of preset model that someone can look at and say, oh, you should be doing this versus that. Your goal should be to go to medical school and get to, open a practice by 35 and family and kids by 42, and you're not doing that. So what's wrong with you? Or your path as an academic should be this. And there's no vantage point from that perspective. To your point, which I think was really useful to bring up, about there are certain values in life that are super important, and that losing sight of them can be harmful. So you gave the example of having friendship or love or just sort of intimate relationships and so on. I agree, those are important. But again, it's taking one's life seriously means taking that part of your life seriously too. It can't just be, I have sort of nothing else in my universe of values forever and ever and ever. And because in effect, to what end are you doing this? Like, how are you going to enjoy your life? Is it you're going to sprint a marathon until you die, and then at the last minute you're going to have a gasp? That's not quite right. And there's one thought I want to throw back at you, and just get to your point about how to think about this. We didn't talk. I wish we had spent a bit more time on the criticisms, because I think they're really pregnant with philosophic meaning. But so let me raise one issue that I think makes it hard for people to think about the basic issue of what is the role of career and work in life, in a good life. And that is, and you were touching on this as well, both of you in different parts of the conversation. It's this, which is, it's easy to go wrong, right? So the idea of workaholic, right? It's modeled after alcoholic. It's like you're treating work in a way that is, the suggestion is pathological. The suggestion is psychological drives that are not healthy. And so before there was criticism of hustle culture, I'm old enough to remember when, he's a workaholic, and it's not a good thing, right? It's like it's ruining his life. And now there's something real about that. Like, not everyone who works long hours is a workaholic, but some people who do that are doing it because they want to run away from something, in the same way that people who drink too much are trying to run away from something oftentimes. And again, I don't want to turn this into a psychological discussion. It's not my field, but there's definitely a way in which people can fasten onto what is a legitimate and important part of life, which is work, and treat it in ways that are unhealthy and in effect counterproductive. And so when you think about the critics of the people criticizing hustle culture, some of what they're picking up is, well, why were you working like that? Like, what's the point here? Were you doing this because you're trying to cope with psychological challenges that you haven't faced or haven't identified, let alone faced? Are you doing it because you're unconfident in other areas of your life? You don't want to date, and you're kind of blocking that out. I was going to do this one thing in my life, I don't have time, because you don't feel like you could be doing that. So there's real issues here that are layered in and that make the criticisms, I think, more plausible. So when you watch various videos of, I tried hustle culture and it ruined my life, here's what I learned from it. And okay, yeah, there's definitely ways in which people go wrong independent of hustle culture. And I think the criticisms further blur it, because they want to present this package of hustle culture, as you were saying, Tristan, that it's bringing in a whole bunch of different things. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good, some of them are questionable. And it's making it hard to think about this issue of what should be the role of work. How should you approach ambition? And that's part of my criticism of this whole, that's why I think of it as, it's in scare quotes. It's not clear what the phenomenon is. I think ambition is good, being serious about your life. There's a lot of things here that are important to tease out. But let me pause there and throw it back to you guys.
So my final point on this. So you mentioned the workaholic who is probably missing on some things, but for everyone, that's not a statistic, but for every one person who is this workaholic who, let's say, is missing out on things, how many people have untapped potential? How many people live a life who, if they got the self-confidence that, yeah, I can do it, that it's possible, if they get the inspiration that I could be more in life, I could be more fulfilled. I would say for every one person who is workaholic, there are many, 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 many people who have untapped potential. So this is why, even though I take into accordance your points, Tristan's and Elan's, I understand how you can say that this can go wrong. I still think, my final point is, I still think that our culture is at a stage where hustle culture is a move towards the right direction, because untapped potential and lack of self-confidence that you can do more is a big problem. And again, I saw it in myself. For many years, I thought that, well, I mean, I was watching you people in the Ayn Rand mission and I was saying, how nice would it be if one day I'd be there? But it's impossible. No, it turns out it's not. It's not impossible. And I'm very glad that I found some mentors, even if they don't know of my existence, that inspired me to pursue my dream.
Yeah, so I would say that, going back to what I was about the causal perspective, that's a really correct point. But just thinking about things like what you just said. So, imagining someone who's, let's say, is an engineer or a lawyer, and you might think, could they work harder? Like, is there more untapped potential that they don't have? Well, one question to think about is, what do we mean by the potential? Like, potential for what? And I think it's actually really important that you said fulfillment, because if we're talking about a potential for a more integrated life, a life in which your values fit better together, in life in which you're more engaged, then that's an important kind of potential. But that might be the kind of potential that people who are, in fact, hustling are lacking. So it's not just you might be working really. I know people, actually, I have examples in my friends who, to reach their potential in terms of a life that was meaningful and fulfilling to them, they actually had to cut back on hours at a job that they were working. They had to actually make more room for other pursuits that, in this case, I had a friend who was a lawyer, and she had to make more room for music and art that was really important to her. And it's not that she's not ambitious or not serious in her career, but she wanted a life with both values. And she saw, look, if I'm going to have both of these values, I need to cut back on it. And I think there's an equally valid perspective from which you could say, when she was working those longer hours, she was lacking a certain kind of potential. So if as long as we're thinking about the potential as what's causally required to live a life that's maximally engaging and meaningful and fulfilling to you, then that's what matters, not what's your potential for an increased economic output, or what's your potential for a higher income. And then just the last thing on that, in terms of, I think that's where the things like physical and mental health can come in. And I think that's the part that I'm most sympathetic to, in terms of when people criticize hustle culture and they point out, you can actually, you're usually more productive when you're less exhausted, when you're well rested, when you're relaxed, when you're not stressed. You're a better partner, you're a better friend, you're a better parent. And physical and mental health are real attributes that we have to deal with, and we have to think about them rationally. And that's part of the causal perspective, I think, of what kind of life are we living. And then time also is we have a limited amount of time. And if you want to pursue certain kinds of values besides your work, you have to make time for them by cutting back from your work. And I think that's an equally important and valid sense in which people can realize their potential.
Yeah, Rourke actually goes at some point vacation for 3 months, and one of the one of the reasons he gives is that, something like, I'm paraphrasing, that his work is not at the standards he wants, so he understands that he has reached the point that he needs vacation. So, Elan, parting words.
I was going to amplify your last comment about your quoting, referring to something in the story in the Fountainhead. I would say most broadly here, for people interested in hustle culture and being ambitious, and this whole community that's built up around some of the people you've talked about, the best thing you can do is to read Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, and just look at the characters and look at her perspective on work, and it's the way she thinks of it, playing a role in someone's life, and it's going to open your eyes. It's not only that she has a distinctive view of the value of it, because part of what happens is she lionizes, she treats as heroes productive people in all realms of work, right? There's people who are in industry, people who are scientists, people who are playwrights, and so on. And she sees that creative work is possible in any field if you're approaching it the right way. But the other point, the other benefit or other value for the people who are interested in this topic is it's just so inspiring. I mean, I have to say that's part of what inspired me. Is like, look at this person. It's possible to have a love for the work that you do that's so powerful. It's like a dynamo. It keeps you going, and it makes you climb higher, and it makes you find satisfaction in the work that you do. How do I find that? That was one of the questions that I was left with. So to me, there's a lot more for us to talk about. Maybe we should do another conversation just around philosophy and work. And there's much more than we actually covered. But for people who are listening in, interested in this topic, you owe it to yourself to take a look at Rand's novels and just to get a sense of how she thinks about this.
Excellent. So before we go to the closing remarks, let me say thank you again to our friends who are super chatting, Grisa, Roland, and our friend in the Zoom Q&A. We don't have time to go to your questions. We appreciate your contribution, but we're going to be in Clubhouse around half an hour straight after the show for the duration of 30 minutes. So if you have comments, further questions, join us in Clubhouse. We can continue the discussion there. So Elan, do you want to make the outro?
Well, yeah, join us on Clubhouse. We'll be back here. There'll be another episode of the podcast. We have a topic that I think people will find challenging and interesting. It's about the political battles over public education. I hope you'll join us usual time next week. And thank you, Tristan and Nikos. It's been fun having you guys in the same room. I hope we can set up something like this again next time.
Yeah, that was enjoyable.
Yeah, thanks for being here. See you all next time.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.